Thank you to all researchers, innovators, policymakers, industry leaders, and students who have joined us. We are thrilled to see such a diverse audience because strengthening India's research translation ecosystem truly requires all of us to work together. Over the past few years, India has seen encouraging growth in scientific output and deep tech entrepreneurship. Yet the journey from laboratories to real world deployment continues to face persistent challenges, whether in technology transfer, institutional enablers, market readiness, or early stage engagement. FAST recently released the Translational Research Playbook, a compendium of pioneering initiatives, success stories, and enabling practices that catalyzes India's lab to market innovation. Now, to guide this today's conversation will aim to shine a light on issues which are inhibiting the technology commercialization and explore what bold system-level interventions can help India unlock its next wave of innovation. Now, for this important discussion, we are privileged to have with us a distinguished panel of leaders who have shaped India's innovation landscape across institutions, translation centers, and global collaborations. Before introducing our panel, I have the pleasure of introducing our chair and moderator for the evening, Professor Ramgopal Rao. Professor Rao is one of India's most respected choices in science and innovation policy, a pioneering academic, and is currently the Vice-Chancellor of Pilani. His leadership has been instrumental in advancing institutional models for deep tech research translation. We are honored to have him moderate today's conversation. Now, let me introduce our esteemed panelists. Professor Sivaprakasam, Head of the Healthcare Technology Innovation Center at IIT Madras, an institution that has set a national benchmark for academia-led innovation and impactful healthcare technologies. Professor Gurumoorthy, Head of FSID at IISc Bangalore, who has been at the forefront of building India's most successful translation and incubation ecosystems within a public research institution. Dr. Premnath Venugopalan, Director of Venture Center, one of India's most successful science-based business incubators and a champion of deep tech, entrepreneurship, and industry partnerships. Ms. Anandi Iyer, Director of the Fraunhofer Office India, who brings a valuable global perspective on institutional models for applied research, industry collaboration, and technology deployment. Thank you all for being with us today. We look forward to an engaging and thought-provoking discussion on the structural, cultural, and policy changes required to strengthen India's research translation landscape. With that now, I invite Professor Ramgopal Rao to deliver the opening remarks and set the stage with his talk on reimagining the role of institutions in India's innovation landscape. Professor Rao, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Shil, and very happy to be moderating this panel. And for those of you who do not know what FAST India is the Foundation for Advancing Science and Technology, completely philanthropy driven. And they are doing pioneering work now and helping multiple organizations in India in launching new programs, in understanding the research landscape and what kind of new policy directions we need to be taking going forward. So thanks for all the good work that you are all doing. And I think coming to the translational research aspects in India, as you all know, India is a large country. And if you look at the number of institutions, we have more institutions than any other country in the world. And in terms of number of students, we are only second to China. And we have many students. The demographic dividend is in a way on our side. And but even if you look at the research, that has happened, we are currently third in the world, according to at least some estimates, in terms of number of publications. So I think a lot of research is happening in India. And if you look at patents, that is something that we were not doing well. But last 5-6 years, now we are at the 7th position in the world when it comes to number of patents filed. So that also has taken place. And even in citations, right, we are 9th now among the top 10 countries in the world. So there are many metrics that we can be proud of. And I think that has definitely, made India, a respected kind of a scientific sort of a power, when it comes to the academic institutions, research, and all of that. I think, but all the positive things stop there when it comes to translating that knowledge into wealth, right? I mean, I think getting funds and publishing papers is something that we have perfected now. But I think how do we translate the knowledge that we are generating into something which is of use for the society? I think that is where the innovation comes into picture. So when it comes to innovation, we are now 38th in the world, and but that too, primarily because of the IT, where we have done pretty well. But if you look at the deep tech science to technology translation, all of that, I think we again have a long way to go. But even if you look at academia research collaborations, there is ranking. The same agency that ranked us 38th for innovation also ranked us 86th in the world among some 130 countries they surveyed when it comes to academia industry collaborations. So our problem is not doing science. I think we given funds, given a little bit of orientation, India does very well in terms of science, right? But our major problem is translating this science into anything that is of use for the society. And that is where while we are filing patents, these patents aren't really getting commercialized, aren't really getting licensed. While we are doing a lot of startups now, but there are less than 5% of them which are deep tech kind of startups. Particularly among the unicorns, there are less than 5% of them which are based on an IP, an intellectual property. I think that tells the entire story about India. I think the question, before all of us is what India needs to do now. I think last 75 years, we have been able to establish institutions, we have been able to do good science, and but what next now? The next, as Prime Minister, talks about Viksit Bharat 2047. I think what should we be doing in the next 2 decades, for that matter, so that India is able to use all the knowledge that is getting generated for societal benefit. I think that is what we are primarily looking at as part of this panel discussion. There are three aspects to this. I think the first aspect we will discuss is the roadblocks. I think let's accept what are the challenges right now. While some have done very well, at least those of you on the panel, I think you've all been champions in your institutions. Even for many scientists, I think we have all been able to take the great science that you have done in labs to the land, right? I think that is something that many of us have done. But the question is, it's not about these few individuals. If you look at it across the nation, right, it hasn't really been the norm. And so what do we do to ensure that it becomes a norm rather than an exception, which is what it is right now? The second aspect we look at is what are the policies, that we need to be looking at in order to enable the more and more translational science. When I say translational science, it's not to undermine the basic science. Of course, basic science is the pipeline for any technology. So therefore, that must never be, cut. And the basic science must be encouraged, must be funded, and we must do that, of course. And that is where eventually it becomes applied, and eventually it becomes technology. So what kind of policies we need for enabling more translational kind of research in the institutions? And as some of you from your organizations itself, some of you have done very well. There are best practices that we have put in place, which are in vogue in your institutions. And how do we take those best practices and apply them in various other institutions through policies? I think these are the three things that we will start discussing about: the roadblocks, the policies that are required now at this stage for the next decade or so, and what are the best practices that exist in some institutions, and what we can do to make it more enabling in all other institutions too. I think these are the sort of things that we will start looking at. And I think let's start with in the same order in which I see the names now. So we will start with Professor Mohanasankar Sivaprakasam. He heads the Healthcare Technology Innovation from IIT Madras. As many know, IIT Madras, has pioneered this model of research park. I think that is one thing IIT Madras has done very well, which many other institutions are trying to replicate now. But I think personally, he has been able to translate a lot of technologies for commercial benefit. And so I think Professor Sivaprakasam, I think after you have come back to the country, what sort of challenges you faced? How did you overcome them, and how have you been able to do all these? In the time that you have been here, and so I think your personal journey will be and something that we will all be very keen to know. So, Professor Mohanasankar.
Thank you, Professor Rao. Thank you, Sheel, for inviting me. So, in fact, the way you actually prefaced it is actually pretty much the journey itself. Part of the reason I was able to do all this is the institutional structures and the ecosystem. Institutional structure is actually a tangible one. It may appear like an intangible. Actually, it's a tangible one. And the ecosystem that was there allowed me to take this big risk at a very early stage, which you pointed out. I was 29 when I started this center, that we will have an explicit mission that we will count the success of this center, measure the success of this center by the number of patients that are touched through these technologies, which essentially means through industry commercialization. So at that time, the market for medical devices in India, consumption of medical devices in India was around 35,000 crores, 35 to 40,000 crores. And practically everything is imported except for consumables, as you know. So we said, can we make a reasonable dent, right? Few hundreds to few thousands, preferably tens of thousands eventually. That's where this country should go. But we quickly realized that Indian industry, there are two fundamental challenges, which is partly the question which you asked, is the investment from industry in R&D. When I say R&D, I don't necessarily mean basic R&D, which probably is a far stretch for Indian industry right now. Let's face the reality, right? They're under extreme competitive pressures all around the world. I'm talking about R&D at the level which is 2-year, 3-year, which can translate something that academia has already discovered or innovated or developed. Even this R&D investment is terribly lacking. I will use that word very strongly. Terribly lacking, right? So that's perhaps one of the biggest barriers, because if you want to translate into commercial success, the commercial arm, which is obviously not the institute, the academic institute, which is the industry, has to come not just forward, has to meet this almost 60%. I won't say midway, right? Because it's beyond midway. Right? It's more like 65, 70%. That's the first barrier. The second barrier is, which is actually a structural issue, they're all very small. Most of these, especially in healthcare at least, and this is not true for larger industries, where I would even more put this charge on that, large industrial houses should be doing much more. But in areas like medtech or even biotech to some extent, which I'm sure Prem will talk about, the industries are quite small. Right? So their capacity to do this, right? It's not more than 2 to 3 people in a company. I'm giving you a more practical way of even looking at it. Right? 2, 3, 4, 5 people is already a lot who can actually work with academia, translate this, and of course the investment. So we took an approach saying that, we will explicitly work with industry right from day one. Now, this is a big risk, right? As Professor Rao, this is not something academia does, right? We do our work, then when it reaches a certain level, we work with industry. So here we said from day zero, we will start. And obviously, people said, that's too big a risk for a young faculty. I said, okay, we'll take a risk. We fail, we fail. But it worked out. It worked out because IIT Madras had a structure which allowed us to do this. Now, let me enumerate a little bit. What does the structure mean? Right? The metrics of academic success, or rather success in academia, which you beautifully put it, was earlier publications, which proxy of it is graduate students, and then patents came. We have started to explicitly measure technologies and technology transfer. Right? So the question which you asked earlier, I think, Sheel, is, what can we do? It's this metric. Of course, we have to be careful with measuring, right? Because once you start measuring, people somehow start to get those numbers, right? So you have to be a little careful. But it's not easy to just come up with numbers when you're looking at commercial success, right? Because at the end of the day, somebody has to make revenue. You can't make that up. So that measure was there at IIT Madras in a sort of an explicit manner. Right? Professor Bhaskar's term made it like very explicit. If you have attempted a technology and if you have commercialized it, even if it had a commercial failure, the market failure, I would say, it will still count as an important metric. So I was lucky there. Of course, Research Park made a big difference because inherently it was this 10, 20 feet away from campus, which is outside the campus, but still connected to the campus, which does explicit commercially focused research help. In fact, the center is physically located, even though this is an IITM R&D center, it is physically located in the research park, which is just, literally 15 feet, not even 20 feet. So that's how we started. So I would list these as the 3 or 4 barriers and gaps. I'm not sure, sometimes it's not really a barrier, it's more of a gap. You can fill it in, you don't have to necessarily climb it. The barrier, if you ask me, it's more cultural. Right? Academia is, somehow we distinguish between Lakshmi and Saraswati, saying academia is Saraswati, we shouldn't talk about money, we should not do this. But I think, startups have proven that most of the campus startups, start from there and then you come out. Right? So I will stop there. I'll circle back once the other panelists have made some.
I will ask a very pointed question, which I'm sure many young faculty would also like to know. When you just join an academic institute, there is a pressure to publish, right? I mean, everybody is doing that. Unless you do that, you can't get your promotion. And when you are doing some translational kind of a science, and when you are working with industry, often publications are not the priority, right? There you have to get things done. Sometimes the work becomes routine. Students don't want to do that kind of a routine work, and industry also doesn't want you to publish. I think that problem many young faculty today face right now. So how did you overcome that?
So I'll be transparent with you on this, and it is obviously out there in my CV. I did not, it's really surprising. A lot of people don't realize this. I actually did not publish significant papers till almost 3, 4, 5 years after I joined, which is very late. You're immediately under pressure to publish. That was a conscious decision I took. And of course, it turns out now today we are the most largest published biomedical engineering group in the country. So I figured out a model, and I'll present this model to you. It may not work for everybody because there is institutional gaps there. So we have a two-armed structure of the lab, which I may say. There is project staff who are essentially full-time. And then there are research scholars, MS and PhD. We realized that you cannot ask the research scholar to explicitly focus do this industry, big D development work, right? It can be a big R with a small d, 60-40, you can push it to even 50-50, that's okay. Right? So that I was able to do, but you need to have full-time engineers and project staff to do this work, at least in health tech, where industry doesn't have enough people. Right? So and this is where it goes back to the model. I would strongly urge institutions to look at not project staff as, I'm going to use this harsh word, not like second-class citizens, but an integral part of your R&D engine, which happened at IIT Madras. So I was literally lucky. This happened at an institute almost 20 years ago. The other aspect, which I think is now starting to happen, is have this project-based, and I would even say external or part-time MS/PhD, where the person either from the industry or from the startup, when I say industry, it's an established industry, I mean, can do work at the industry and pursue a important, but not necessarily a basic science research, but an engineering research. As you know, there are many questions, even at testing level. It's very hard to figure out. It takes 2 years of research. So that is another model. These are not exclusive models, but these are all models that I used, and somehow it worked out. But you're right, Professor Rao, I did not publish my first journal till 2014. which is like 6 years after I joined, which is a big risk. I took that.
Madras was very forgiving, so not every institution,
That's right.
For example, that brings me to Professor Gurumoorthy. I think IISc would have had a problem because you also have this tenure process, right? After 5 years, if you haven't published much, you may not even keep your job there. So I think, I'll now move to Professor Gurumoorthy. I think there's a natural transition to you. I mean, you come from an institute where it's all publish or perish. I even heard these stories like the paper is ready, where is the data kind of a thing. I think coming from that kind of an institute, right, where you have to publish, how did you, look at building or even the innovation, the center that you have, the SID, right, encouraging faculty to start companies. Now I know, all my friends from IIT Madras, IIT, IISc, who are good researchers, all have companies now.
Yes.
I think that transformation has taken place in IISc now, which is a pretty good sign. So good researchers are becoming also entrepreneurs. I think that has happened in the last 10 years. So how did you, see that transformation in IISc? So the starting from publish or perish culture to now doing entrepreneurship kind of a thing.
So it's very interesting, actually. Not many directors acknowledged it publicly. I think it was Anurag Kumar who said that while we say this public or perish is the stated policy, but the root of evaluation is impact. If anything else you do makes an impact, right, that will be taken into account. Unfortunately, it was not widely circulated. But historically, if you see in the institute, it has had a long tradition of transferring know-how to industry and converting it into products. Mysore sandal, right? It was one of the earliest homegrown technology. It happened in the chemistry labs of the institute. Then a company was formed to take it. The silicon wafer technology that Gurumoorthy did, some time back. And there are many such examples in the past. In the middle, of course, yes, this whole thing of publishing, especially in an international forum, got root, and it has, had its then. But now there is a realization that there is more to academic life than creating knowledge. That knowledge must also translate to the marketplace. So I think the historical tradition and the vision of the founder. The vision of the founder was also this. It was in two parts. One, that the institute must do original investigations and create new knowledge. But two, was to use that original knowledge created for the benefit of the larger society around us. So it's the second part that took a while to catch on, but now I'm very happy that it is catching on. Plus, of course, the younger faculty are coming from the US, so that model is there. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you, but
sure.
Was there any policy or anything that IISc did midway which actually, accentuated this entire, translation kind of activity or entrepreneurship kind of an activity?
Certainly, yes. I think you may be aware, I don't want to take names here, but, around the turn of the century, the institute was about to lose, I would say, 5 of its, star faculty. We lost one quite immediately, and that company has now become a jewel in the crown in India, in some sense. And the other 4, while did not leave then, eventually, I think all of them ended up leaving, right? And that was probably a trigger for sure, that, that there is this aspiration in the young faculty, and there must be a rational and sort of an official way to give vent to that spirit. And Professor Kincha and the leadership around him at that time, I think they really, did stick their neck out and created this faculty entrepreneurship policy, which I think was a landmark, I would say, a milestone. We were probably the first one to officially say that we will allow faculty to remain on roles while they go and start a company and have ownership in the company. While they may not take salary, they will take ownership in the company. And so that was, I think, came from the fact that there was this realization that quite often faculty will tend to vote in favor of satisfying their entrepreneurial urge than, stay on in the academic role. So that probably played a big role.
But unfortunately, many universities in the country still don't have that entrepreneurship policy still. Many of our universities, for example, don't even have that policy. So,
yes. And I think it must come. It must come because I think the timing is right. The opportunities are there, and I think the ecosystem is also fairly well established now. I mean, it is not the same as it was 20 years ago. It is a much better place for people to become entrepreneurs, especially tech and science-based entrepreneurs. So I hope that this will change. This will change. I do hope that. I think one point I just wanted to make, I don't know if you have any other questions to ask me, but I just thought I would like to further one more point on this gaps, in our interaction with industry and this translation game. I call it the tyranny of the TRL, which is the handover that happens, is at the invention stage. It's about 3 or 4, right? And usually elsewhere, there are mechanisms to move this up so that industry can grab it. Here, neither the industry has the appetite to, start from 4, and move up, nor are there any, entities that can bridge this gap. Startups is one way, but I think startups cannot do all the things, right? There has to be a mechanism for a translational group or a translational entity, right, which will take this responsibility of moving the TRL up and then, licensing it out, or, do it as a work for hire for a company. Right? One of these things I think is missing. The second one has to do with talent, right? Because of the IT game, India is, there's a plethora of program managers, but we do not have enough product managers, nor do we have enough product engineers. Right? And I think both these are very critical, if any serious transformation has to happen.
Right. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Professor Gurumoorthy. Dr. Iyer, I think, that's a very good point which Professor Gurumoorthy made. In India, one of the problems is in academia, we come up to TRL tree kind of a levels, right? A proof of concept, and then the student graduates, and, we also move on to the next problem. So there are a lot of such projects here which have ended at TRL tree with patents, good publications, but nothing goes beyond that. At least in 95% of cases, that is the situation. And for every faculty member to figure out how to take this TRL 3 to TRL 7, TRL 8, and then industry would get interested and would want to take it up, is not going to happen. I think not everybody, can do that. I think that is where what Professor Gurumoorthy mentioned, those institutional mechanisms become very important. The institutions which are, looking out for such IP, right, at TRL 3 level, and then take up that IP and then build teams around that, provide funding or whatever is required to take things to the next level, and then, interest industry so that industries would take it forward and all of that. India, unfortunately, doesn't have, any such institutions today. Fraunhofer is the great model. Right. I mean, everybody has been talking about replicating the Fraunhofer model. CSIR was supposed to have been our Fraunhofers, but then, that hasn't gone in the direction of Fraunhofer. So what do you think, from that point of view, if India has to overcome this, that valley of death kind of a thing, what is that we need to do from an institutional, point of view?
Thank you very much, Professor Rao, and also FAST for having me on this. It's a subject that I've been working for the last nearly 25 years on, working on translational research. And the Fraunhofer model is definitely a gold standard. But you have to understand it's in the European context where the scientific landscape is very robust, is very matured, and has very clear segments of who's doing what. So the university does academics and they do a little bit of research because they work closely with industry, even at the university level. So education is only 40% theory, 60% is actually hands-on. And that hands-on element comes from the industry. So right from the education, industry is involved. And when they move in that continuum, you go towards, say, an Institute of Applied Sciences or your postgraduate degrees, where again, you're working with the industry on, real-time problems when you're putting your master theses. And needless to say, when you're doing your PhD, you're working on an industry-driven topic and pushing science. Now, Fraunhofer is something which is distinct from a university and from the industry. So we are what you would call, we crunch the innovation cycle and we take research from lab to market. We are very well aware that an academician is a different person with the idea of science as a noble activity, wants to push the envelope of science without fear of it reaching the market or not. He or she is innovating, inventing, and then they may bring it to the Fraunhofer. Now, the advantage of a Fraunhofer is that the 76 institutes that we have, each institute The director is 50% at the local university and 50% at the Fraunhofer Institute. So there is a seamless interaction with the university, the faculty, the students who come and do research with us. And on the other hand, people who do their PhDs with us go into the industry. So when they go into the industry, they carry the knowledge of a Fraunhofer and work in the industry and come back as our ambassadors to give us projects. So there is a seamless connectivity. Now, that is the one thing I find missing in India. We are working in silos. Academicians do education, industry does its own thing, and there is a serious trust deficit between the two. We have tried to bridge this several times, but I think it will take some time and a sustained dialogue to take this further. The second thing is that we are still in India very supply driven in our research. Even in the conversations that I've attended, we are always saying industry has to come forward and we are bringing research to you. Fraunhofer is demand driven. We don't work on a project unless industry has asked for it. There has to be an industry at the end of the pipeline which is saying we are going to take it to market. So they come with the demand, and we survive because 70% of our income, which is about 3.6 billion euros, comes from projects, and only €1 for every €2 the government gives Fraunhofer, and that too in the form of high risk projects which industry will not invest in. So I think that impact that you are creating, and the data shows that for every €1 given to Fraunhofer, we return 14 euros to the GDP of the nation. And that is audited, that is taken care of, that this impact happens. So I think that is another area where I see that India is very supply driven in research. And finally, the third one is industry is so reticent to put money into research. They see it as a cost rather than an investment. And they look at, even though we are earning about nearly 7 to 9 million euros in India, taking research from industry, they always ask for ROI within the year, so ideally they want to either in-license or they want a patented technology, but these are not, then you're not developing your sovereignty, your technology. What you're doing is basically using knowledge for a very limited window and creaming that with profits. And we have become a service economy in innovation. So we take an art or a part, produce and return back in the shortest period of time. So in my view, those are the three areas where I see a very fundamental difference between the Fraunhofer model and how we are shaping in India.
I think that also one thing is Fraunhofer, of course, all demand-driven research. You identify a problem, develop it and translate it, and industries take it up. How is your connect with the academic institutions? What are the structured ways you connect with academia right now in the Fraunhofer system?
So one is, I told you, it is institutional, where every institute head is 50% chair of that application at the local university. So he brings with him the faculty also. Many faculty members at the university work with the Fraunhofer. Right now, I'm sitting in Braunschweig. So the TU Braunschweig, there are at least 10 faculty members at the Fraunhofer Institute of Surface Technology or Wood Research, and they're usually co-located. So there is a lot of interaction that happens. The second is that we have an institutional arrangement where on certain topics, Fraunhofer is a coordinator of what is called a knowledge cluster. And Fraunhofer cannot do everything. So on basic research, on understanding where students and faculty can work together, these knowledge clusters work together on a problem. Like if you say recycling of batteries. So there are elements that are happening in the university. There are industry projects that are coming in. So faculty, students, Fraunhofer work together. And this is a knowledge cluster, particularly in topics that are a little far away from the industry. And you need to push or accelerate the research to market.
Yeah, I think that's a next good segue to Premnath here from the CSIR lab system. So, but I think it's very interesting to see the kind of work he has been able to do, being from the NCL family, the NCL venture there, and how it has been able to translate a lot of good science that's happening in CSIR labs into products. I think that's one thing NCL has done. But my complaint, I serve on many committees in CSIR. One of the problems is CSIR, though NCL has created the venture center, but still CSR is very unclear about other labs having their incubation centers. There are so many scientists in CSIR. We have brought technologies to, to a TRL 3, 4 kind of levels, but they are all struggling right now. I mean, they cannot start companies. They cannot go to somewhere to get the technology developed further. I think the only option available for them is to get an industry interested, which will take the technology and develop it further. And that handshaking between any lab and any industry is never really very easy. So I think a lot of good research that's happening in CSIR is falling through the cracks right now. But NCL is a great example, the NCL venture. So I mean, Dr. Premnath, I think your own journey in the CSIR system, how you have been able to build that venture in Pune, and what should CSIR be doing? I think you just heard the Fraunhofer story. We all wanted to see CSIR become the Fraunhofer labs of India. Where do you think the challenges really lie right now?
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks to FAST for inviting me, and thank you for the question. First of all, I think I just wanted to point out that one of the fundamental issues in CSIR is the identity itself, right? You mentioned that you wanted it to look like Fraunhofer. Well, the Fraunhofer model is from the 1970s, whereas CSIR was from the 1940s and 50s. Perhaps they thought that they should be more of a Max Planck than a Fraunhofer Institute. So there is an issue of identity, and in CSIR, there is also the 37 labs, and they're spread across different points in the spectrum from knowledge creation to knowledge translation. And that complexity is both a strength and a weakness, because at the end of the day, they operate as one institution, which I wish they had more autonomy, each of them, to pursue what they could do. That said, there have been several phases where the CSIR institutions have created a lot of value for society. Especially if you look at NCL, for example, there has been a phase where we have shaped the basic chemicals, dyes kind of markets, especially in the western region of India. If you look at it today, the powerhouse for chemical industry, there's a lot of presence from places like NCL and also ICT Mumbai, UDCT as well. Besides that, there has been a whole phase of farm chemicals during the Green Revolution, followed by the generic pharmaceutical industry that came out from people who were trained in the chemical sciences and chemical engineering. And following that, a phase of catalysis and petrochemicals and so on and so forth, a strong relationship with the petrochemical industry. And following that, a period in the 90s where we were able to work with the best global MNCs and developing technologies, and there have been several success stories there. In the 70s, for example, there was a whole wave of technologies which were licensed out, and 80s to various companies. So much of the Indian generic pharma industry, farm chemicals industry have benefited a lot from that. But in the 90s, there were some outstanding examples which were relating to the polymer industry, for example, and catalysis. And you may not realize, but half of the world's, those large polycarbonate bottles that you see, which are inverted and are used in the dispensers, have an ingredient which is from NCL technology, right? It's quite impressive in my opinion. But that said, it has been a struggle, okay? And the struggle has to do with a lot of different aspects. But I just wanted to focus on a few things which are very important in today's context. And in that sense, let me first just tell you a little bit about my own journey. I'm basically a person trained in biomed engineering, but more from the materials side. I look at implants and so on and so forth. When I returned back from the US, I had sort of sensed a little, I'd got a sense of success taking things to market, and it was very satisfying, and I wanted to replicate that here. And the problem was that there was no ecosystem to work with. we as a biomed person, I want to see people use it, right? Patients benefit from it. It wasn't satisfying enough that it just ends up in a paper and something on the shelf. And the question is what the ecosystem needed to make it happen. For example, after you have done some work in the laboratory, taking it to a point where you have hundreds of samples to work with. You can do animal studies, you can work with clinical, you have to have prepare samples for clinical studies, get it validated, approved, funded, fund all of these things. All this ecosystem was not there. Plus, for example, if I needed to speak to a medical facility, a hospital, for example, all the doctors were busy with patient care. Research was not on the agenda at all, right? So the question was, how do we create that ecosystem? So one of the theses is on which whatever we have done at Venture Center and NCL is that number one, if you want to work on product technologies and innovations, you need to have ecosystems in place which are supportive. And when I say ecosystems in place, I mean all the nuts and bolts of what you need to have, not only money, but you need to have people who understand various aspects in the medical space, maybe regulations, maybe understanding how to do marketing and sales, how it works in the real field, and so on and so forth. All the different aspects of the ecosystem. Plus, it is also true that it's the ecosystem that benchmarks the ambitions of innovators. If you have a very weak ecosystem, a poor ecosystem, your ambitions immediately come down. You tend to work with whatever is available because at the end of the day, you want to show some success, right? So it's important to raise that ambition up, right? And that means you need to have some specialized capabilities in the ecosystem to build those up over a period of time. So the question was, how do we get there? Otherwise, you would be only working with the little things. Everybody will start making maybe agarbattis out of herbal solutions, and that's not going to cut it, right? You need to do high tech as well. And most of us as researchers are interested in the cutting edge, right? That's what excites us quite a bit. So the question is, where is the counterpart will interface with us to take it to market as well, right? Another part of the ecosystem is finding co-founders, finding people who can work with you. See, all said and done, academics can take it that far. Even if they put on entrepreneurial shoes, investors want to see full-time founders leading the ship. They're not interested in the academics driving the startups. Okay, it's okay to have them there, but it's not enough, right? You need to have full-time people. And where do you get those full-time people? Today in the IT business, you do get a lot of people who have done it before, and you can find them. What about in the sciences, right? Where do you, as a researcher, find that co-founder who's going to be full-time committed to that business? So these kind of things have to be sort of brought together into the ecosystem, right, to make it work. So as Venture Center, we have bet on the full-time entrepreneur. Quite honestly, I'm not betting on necessarily the researcher, right? The researcher is very important, right? But the people who we need to bet on, I think, is the entrepreneur, because they're going to put their career, their efforts, everything on the line to take it to market, right? It's clear that large companies are hesitating to approach us, right? There's a trust deficit, as Anandi mentioned, but that has happened also in the West. The days when Dow's, DuPont, GE's used to approach Harvard's or MIT's has reduced considerably now, right? So that's why everybody's looking at startups. And we also need to have startups going. A specific question which you asked, which I should address, which is about incubators and spin-outs in CSIR system. I think policies have not been very helpful. One of the reasons your CSIR institutions have not been able to create incubators is because there's a blanket rule somewhere from the government which prevents creation of Section 8 companies starting from 2017. We were created in 2007, so we are still there. We were the first incubator as Venture Center. As far as spinouts is concerned, the government came out with a very good policy in 2009, which allows for scientists to create companies. But there has always been a little bit of haziness around that, in the sense, although it explicitly allows central government employees employed as scientists to start companies, and we have used that to create spin-outs out of NCL. There is a lot of fear in the system, and also are a lot of people who don't understand this process, creating a lot of fear around the creation of new startups from the government institutions. But that is the way that is definitely needed. I would think that creation of startups is a very important way to take high tech research to market, and even the National Academy of National Economic Research Bureau in the US also points it out. That's the best vehicle. Startups are the best vehicle for research commercialization of high tech. Yeah, so I'll stop here. Thank you.
No, that's a very good point. I think that also brings in the importance of policies in an organization to encourage such activities, but also the fact that entrepreneurship is the way you can commercialize the IP. In fact, if you look at Stanford or MIT, right, you can go to their web pages and look at how much money did Stanford earn, let's say last year, from IP licensing, or how much did MIT earn from IP licensing. Less than 1% of their revenues actually came from IP licensing. I mean, sitting in the middle of Silicon Valley, even Stanfords and MITs cannot earn enough to run for anything substantial from the IP licensing. But the same universities, right, the same places, Stanford and MIT, if you look at the value they created through their startups, right, that has crossed $3 trillion, $4 trillion category, right? That the technologies that have been developed in these universities, somebody starting a company, somebody using that to build new products, that they have been able to create a few trillions of dollars of wealth. I think IP filing a patent and expecting that somebody will take that IP and give you $100 million isn't going to happen on a yearly basis. I think that may happen once in a blue moon. But unless we build the deep tech entrepreneurship ecosystem in the country, where scientists and faculty members who have been deeply involved in research can go and take that IP, work with industries and build value around that, this is not going to really make any major impact in the country. I think this is also one of the questions I'm looking at now, those questions. So I think the IP creation part of it, while we are filing patents, but in the absence of the deep tech entrepreneurship ecosystem, in the absence of industry coming and working with academia, I think through just filing of IP, we will never be able to make a big impact. So I think in all your institutions, how is that licensing activity happening right now? I think I know all IIT Madras or NCL, all of us are filing lots of patents now, right? At least 10 times more compared to 5-6 years ago. But has anything improved on the licensing part in any of your institutions? I mean, any of you can take that question. So the Mr. Gurumoorthy,
I think, what you say is right. That I was also going to have a point that not many people have made money off licensing IPs, but I think it's a good idea to try and push IP out. Those that cannot be taken up by startups, can it be pushed elsewhere? So this product acceleration is one thing that we are now doing actively. Where we are trying to get companies interested in it enough to put maybe say 20 to 25% of the cost. In the balance, we try to raise it through other people who are willing to put in the risk capital, and do this translation and then give it to the company, and they run with it. I do believe that model, while it may not be as spectacularly successful as Google equity that was given to Stanford, but I think it will definitely be a model that helps sustain investments in science and technology, because people will see the translation part. So I think from that point of view, it makes sense to support this. And as a corollary to that, I just wanted to make one more point. As a policy thing, government must also think like the film producers or even VC. Right? They all wait for the hit, and then they can suffer a few flops and then one more hit. Right? So the government must also tell its finance ministry that this funding has to be like that. So SBIR, they can create and treat that as a grant in the hands of the founders of companies or the small, medium enterprise owners, right? I think the risk is worth taking. I agree that a significant percentage of them may not return, in a reasonable amount of time. But those that return would have done a great service to the country, and I think it's worth doing this.
The problem right now is, I think, failing with government money is a big challenge right now. So I think, there can be
Yes,
other
so
aspects.
that's where the government mindset should change. I think we should put some film producers there, so that they will do this right.
Can I add a quick comment
please.
about the question which you raised? So first of all, I think we should treat IP as a portfolio activity, in the sense it is well known that you cannot predict winners upfront. Okay, nobody could have predicted a Google algorithm pattern doing as good as it did. And it's also well known that even the best of institutions will have a less than 5% success rate in commercializing some of these patents. But that said, if you don't have those 100, you'll not have those 5, right? And it is important to progress them, and gradually it weans out, Of course, it has to be done smartly so that you're not bleeding in terms of funds. But I think it's important to file. That is something which we should not discourage. And, in our current context, as you said, if the government takes a view, if they do that, you just cannot fail, then it is a recipe for problems if you're doing anything which is a portfolio activity per se, right? So that is something which is very important. Now, in the licensing side of it, I just wanted to point out that most of our institutions do not have sophistication in terms of how we do licensing, how we do tech management, how we do tech transfer, and so on and so forth. We don't have a process of tech marketing. We don't have a process of deal making. Many files will lie at the table of the vice-chancellors or directors waiting for decisions, and they would not know on what basis to do it, right? And so on. So we have to understand that is an important area where we need to build capabilities. This year, we have taken some efforts to build a TTO handbook, which we're going to release on the 2nd with UNIDO support. But we hope it makes a dent. But this is an area which definitely needs help, because when industry has to speak to people who are speaking the same wavelength, and this trust deficit which Anandi mentioned, it's all about relationships, right? At the end of the day, between people, between researchers, between industry, and so on. Even the industry folks who bet on your technology are taking a risk, because they're going to go inside and tell their seniors that this technology is worth betting on. Why would they do that if there's a trust deficit or a respect deficit, right? So this is something which I think we need to cultivate as well, and is an important part of a licensing activity.
Yeah, Anandi, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, sir, I'd like to submit a slightly different perspective on this. Fraunhofer generates 2 patents every working day, and about 7% of our patents get licensed. That's still, you can see that that's not like Dr. Venugopalan said, it's a portfolio activity. It's generating that trust and confidence that we have the knowledge base. So industry believes that you know something more than what they do, and therefore they come to you, right? I mean, the idea is to create a pull effect. But what I see missing in today's discussion here, but also in the country per se, we are not democratizing technology. We are looking at startups that will have a huge gestation period to take technology to market or knowledge to market, or we are looking at the large companies to kind of come and support us in some kind of a charity through CSIR, etc., where there is no skin in the game. Whereas if you look at countries like Germany, even, the Eindhoven concept, what they're doing there is strengthening the medium industry, which is the engine of growth. After all, they are 90% of companies in Europe. In India, of course, the MSME is about total of 92%, out of which M or micro is almost 60%. So, but then if we strengthen the M, the strong M, we create a resilient supply chain, because they are ready with capability. They just needed to be augmented with technology and innovation, and they're hungry. I can tell you that of the most of the projects that come to us, they come from M, not from the large companies. So I think rather than focusing so much on startups, we should start looking at the medium industry, which is agile, nimble, ready to pick up technology and hungry for technology. If you strengthen them, you create democratization of technology, and therefore you can move into the Stanford type of technology commercialization, which won't happen as long as you have 5 large companies asking for technology in India.
Just one data point I want to add here is that even in the US, the largest number of licenses happens to small companies, not just startups. Okay, it's not large companies either. Yeah, please continue. Yeah.
Mohanasankar, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, so in fact, I made this comment earlier. The medium industry, of course, in India, 10 crore companies, it's almost impossible for them to work. I mean, there are various structural reasons. The cost of capital is very high, right? So few tens to couple of 100 crore companies who are also under global competitive pressure. They're not purely trading companies. They are the ones that, in fact, we are seeing at IIT Madras. I've been looking at the kind of industry funding that comes in for commissioned R&D projects. If you look at that, and I think it will hold true for most IITs, it's actually the medium companies, medium to some extent, large, but not very large. We're not talking about tens of billions of dollars. That is your sweet spot for licensing these technologies. But Prem is right in the sense, if you want an infinite gain, which is fundamentally what it is in startups, that's a different route, right? And that's something that will always give you large gains, but that will not give you volume in terms of number of faculty and number of IP that is translated, because that's a definition. So when people say, oh, startup is only 1% to succeed, if more than 5% succeed, that's something wrong, right? I mean, then that's really not, not everybody is winning big, right? So the medium industry, the way it is termed itself is bad. I always keep telling people we should somehow change this thing of medium and micro. Like somehow they don't have that necessarily muscle. But that's the industry where the IP licensing and the academia able to work with industry. When I say work, I mean literally in a practical operative sense, that the sweet spot is there on the medium industries. So we should.
Like it's, but that's also the place where we need to create more avenues for them to collaborate with each other. The
Correct.
barrier to interact, for a small company to come and talk to an IIT professor is also that much more difficult. Whereas somebody in a large company, would have the confidence to come and engage and with the academia. But I think that is also the place probably where we need, more government schemes, how these small micro kind of enterprises can work with academia. I think that's also something which probably is missing in the country today.
If I may,
yeah, Professor Gurumoorthy.
I think you're very right on that point. Yeah, that they need help. I just wanted to, Anandi, that the project that I mentioned about transferring technology, translating them, we are working with medium enterprises, and that's where we hit this, encountered this bottleneck that these people have. They have two problems. One is, of course, the wherewithal to invest. They can't invest 100%. So that is where this 25 and somebody else has to underwrite that risk. That is one. But the second, even more thing is the access to talent. And, they will be hungry, but they won't have the talent to pursue this. So that is another thing that whoever does this translation for them or works with them on the translation has to provide them. And that is one thing that we saw as a very big role for us to play, which was identify talent who would then go and work in the company and hopefully make a career. That is still not certain. So that's another big bottleneck for that.
Yeah. One of the questions
can be a great option, I mean, clusters for shared infrastructure, shared testing, because testing infrastructure is abysmal in our country. How will you take it to scale if you can't test a prototype at industry scale level, So for medium industry, shared infrastructure, shared training facilities, shared cluster approaches are the way it has functioned elsewhere.
Government is beginning to do that. They have created this SATI program, Sophisticated Analytical Technical Help Institutes, and they are funding them now generously to create more such a cluster of facilities, which small scale industries can come and utilize. But these are all new initiatives. I think will take some more time to mature. But, one of the questions also, for example, for deep tech entrepreneurship, involvement of faculty and PhD students is also very important. And today, according to all our policies, as I understand, you cannot be gainfully employed in the universe startup, right? You can provide advice, you can be the director, but you cannot be the CEO of the company, right? Is that the policy in Madras and IISc? I mean, I know I spent 27 years in Bombay and Delhi, IIT Bombay, IIT Delhi, but there you cannot be gainfully employed in your own startup, but you can, unless you are taking sabbatical and all that. But I think otherwise you can be a director, right? You cannot be a CEO. Professor Gurumoorthy? Yeah, Professor Mohan, you are muted.
Yeah, you're mute, Professor Gurumoorthy.
Mohan,
No.
you're also muted.
So
Yeah, you cannot have an executive role. You can't have two jobs. Right?
Yeah.
You can take a leave. I mean, that is not an issue, at least in IITs. You can hold a director position, right, which you are, if you have a significant stake in the company. The other aspect is you can be, you can't be a CTO, but you can run this in your lab on a project basis.
But that also requires good conflict of interest policies.
That's true.
All of that, which is, there are still, at least IITs have been able to figure it out. Even in BITS Pilani, we have a very progressive policy. But when you think of universities and other institutions, now it's a complete disaster there right now when it comes to faculty starting companies. So, yeah.
So you're right. In fact, the conflict of interest is something, Professor Anand used to make a comment saying that, I hope there will be enough problems where we are fighting about hundreds of crores between IITs and others, right? So actually, we have not reached that level. So sometimes we should have a perspective, right? I mean, what are we fighting about, right? In fact, but of course, ethics, micro and kilo are the same, right? So as long as you have a framework, it is possible. Today, I can tell you, there is now almost 150 faculty at IIT Madras are involved in startups, and it works. And this is not just IIT Madras. This has happened now at various IITs. It is definitely possible.
No, I think it's happening at least in our tier 1 institutions, but the tier 2 and then other universities are still struggling with these policies. So that needs to happen. I think Sheel Kapoor, what's about the time now? I think we've already crossed.
Well, thank you. I think we should we can conclude now. So, thank you, Professor Rao. I think thank you to all our panelists for such an insightful and energizing discussion. We can see the richness of the discussion, and I wish we had another 1 hour in everybody's calendar. We could have carried on further. Over the last hour or so, we actually heard some candid reflections on what truly holds us back in research translation in India. More importantly, what it will take to unlock the next level of deep tech innovation. I'd like to take a moment to thank our distinguished guests and panelists once again. Few things that stood out, maybe if I can just recap. Professor Mohanasankar talked about the institutional ecosystem that was prevalent at IIT Madras and how it has helped him. He talked about the industry being involved upfront, which stands out as one of the reasons why they were successful, using project staff more prudently and directly engaged with research translation. The challenge between deciding which side to be working on, Lakshmi side or Saraswati side, that was it always is a discussion. Professor Gurumoorthy, again, great discussion about the vision of the original founder, and that science actually must or not only be for academics, but also support should be actually helping the common people. So that's why you require product translation. The entrepreneurial faculty at IISc, the tyranny of the TRL, the product engineering and product manager approach, both were very critical to any translation success. Dr. Premnath, you talked about the ecosystem again, the funding challenges, about finding co-founders, understanding the regulations, the challenges with CSIR, the startups and the spin-outs. So again, some great discussion there. Thank you for that. And Ms. Anandi Iyer, we talked about a seamless integration. We talked about PhDs in industry, demand-driven projects that are there in Fraunhofer, knowledge clusters, which will be the right way to move forward, and a good discussion on IP and licensing income as well, and possible sweet spot on the medium enterprises for getting scale in our science and technology efforts. A special thank you to Professor Ramgopal Rao for steering this discussion with such clarity and depth. To all our attendees, thank you for joining us. The fact that so many of you were there here today, it reflects the growing momentum around strengthening the India's innovation and research translation landscape. At Fast India, we remain committed to working with all of you, institutions, government, industry, and scientific community, to build the frameworks, the evidence and capacity that can help India from discovery to deployment at scale. With that, we bring this session to a close. Thank you for all for being here and really appreciate this. Thank you once again. We look forward to staying connected and continuing this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you.
you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.